Hi, everyone. This is Mike, and I've been reading a lot of books about people with disability and about disability because, as you know, it's a real interest of mine, and I do adaptive sports. And I came across a wonderful book by Rachel Simon called Riding the Bus with My Sister, and I'm really fortunate in that Rachel agreed to an interview. Hi, Rachel.
Hi, and hi everybody who's watching.
So I found the book to be incredibly interesting. I had no expectations when I started reading the book. I thought, okay, it's a woman going with her sister to ride a bus on her daily kind of excursions. And I mean, talk about why you wrote the book.
Okay, and let me just show the book,
Yeah.
Riding the Bus with My Sister. This is the more recent edition. Okay, so I am one of four children. Oops, as my slides off the table. I am one of four children, and I'm second. The third one is my sister Beth, and we're only 11 months apart. Very early in her life, my mother detected something was not the same as what she had seen in my older sister and me. And Beth was within the year diagnosed with what at the time was a diagnosis we don't use anymore. And now we say intellectual disabilities, although my sister prefers the term special needs. So I try to say what she wants me to say. Anyway, at the time, this was the early 1960s, and people with disabilities were often, the doctors would say, put them away, in an institution. And my parents objected strenuously to that. By odd coincidence, my father had grown up in an orphanage. My father had firsthand experience of living in an institution and hated it and felt unloved. And so we really had this very strong family feeling of what would now be called inclusion, but that Beth deserved all the rights that everybody else has, and to speak her mind and to be educated and live in the wider world. But the world doesn't always see things that way. And a lot of opportunities were shut off from her. There was no federal mandate for education when she was growing up, though where we lived, she was able to get it. But that was not the case across the board in the country. There was no ADA. In any event, in the late 80s, when she was in her later 20s, she moved out of the family house and moved into a group home. And at that point, learned how to navigate the bus system in the city where she was living, which I don't disclose.
Yeah.
And I apologize for this continuing to slide. I hope I've corrected it at this point. Anyway, she learned how to navigate this bus system, learned how to move around, got what's essentially called travel training. And you would think would use the buses in a traditional way, which initially she did. And it was to go from the group home to the sheltered workshop. She hated the sheltered workshop. She hated the group home. She liked the bus. And if you think about her life up till then, she'd had an inclusive life, and buses are inclusive, whereas sheltered workshops are not, and group homes are not. And but she met the love of her life in an adjacent group home, Jesse, who you can see in these pictures behind me with my sister. This one was taken just a week ago. And this one's from maybe 10 or so years ago. In any event, they met in 1989, and they've been together with a couple bumps in the road, but they've been together ever since. So after she lived in the group home for about 5 years, the group home people offered her the opportunity to live in a semi-independent living situation, which means her own apartment with staff coming in a few hours a week. And she jumped at the chance, even though the family was very worried about that. And when she moved into her own place, employment stopped working for her. and she didn't have anything to do with her time. And she came up with this idea out of her head to start riding the buses all day long, and not just to go place, but to have sort of what I came to think of it as is party hopping, going with her best friends who became the bus drivers, and hanging out with them. And when you don't like a situation, you just get off and get on another bus. And in this particular city, there are enough buses where you can do that. And of course, she learned all the schedules and everything. And she, ever since, this is since 1993, has done this every day the buses run, which up until recently did not include Sundays. Now it does. And many days it's as many as 12 to 17 buses, some for just 5 minutes, but most, with the driver she likes, for an hour. And she knows everything about all the drivers and rates them according to the top 10, and they know where they are in the ranking because she lets them know. And in top 10, you're cool. And if you're not in the top 10, you're not cool. And if you've been demoted, you know why you've been demoted. Anyway, the family was not happy when she adopted this lifestyle. And we wanted her to have a traditional job. And it became a tug of war battle kind of thing. But wasn't like we were in control of her life. And her agency that was supporting her wasn't in control of her life. And they were supportive of a concept I didn't know at the time called self-determination, that says she has a right to make her own choices to live her own life. So there was a rift between Beth and the family. And Beth was very willful anyway, so it had always been a little bit tense. But I really loved Beth, and I was pained by this rift. And after several years of this, and always walking around with this cloud over my head of being a bad sister, because you don't want to talk to somebody you're not getting along with. And if you're not approving of someone's life, you're not getting along with them. And if it's someone you were raised to feel you should be responsible for and help out, you're derelict in your duty. And if that's how you believe you show your love, then you're really, falling down on the job, and you're not showing your love, and you're a bad sibling. But the circumstances evolved so that I was a writer, and I was doing freelance commentary, and I said to my editor one day, I don't have ideas for the next piece. I'm too busy. I have too many things going on, and in any event, I had to figure out how to work my schedule so I can go visit my sister for the holidays, and that means I got to work around her bus schedule. And he said, "What?" And I said, I have a sister who rides buses all the time. And he said, "Oh, really? That's fascinating. Tell me more." And I couldn't, because I didn't know as much as I just told you. And he said, "I'm going to assign you to ride with her for a day and write an article about it." And that's what broke the ice. So I called Beth and I said, "Would you be okay if I did this?" And she said, "Yeah." And she was so thrilled. And I think the reason was something that wasn't clear to me, even when I rode with her, and even when I wrote a book about it called Riding the Bus with My Sister. But something that became clear to me as after the book came out, I started meeting lots and lots of people in the disability community, enlightened me further. And a man named William Stillman talked about how the way to deal with someone you love who you're not getting along with is to enter their passion. And my sister had a passion. And when we look at people with disabilities who have something they love, we look at what they love categorically differently than we look at it for typical people. So like what I love the Beatles and broccoli and going for walks. Okay, I mean, pretty simple, right? But those you could at various times in my life have said are my passions. But for a person with disabilities, we say it's their obsession, or it's I don't know what other terms we use, but their obsession, and we degrade it rather than what it really is to them, which is their passion. And so if someone has a passion, enter it, and you'll start to work out your stuff with them, because they will know you're seeing them as an equal, and you're seeing why this matters to them. And if it is something that has a social element like bus riding, you get to meet the people who are part of that person's life and who validate that person, which the drivers did, and my sister's boyfriend, who I hadn't known all that well before then. So riding the bus with my sister is ultimately a year I spent, not every day, riding the bus with her, and getting to know her bus driver friends, her aides, Jesse, and then also kind of going through the family history and how we got to this point. But it also is how I learned the civil rights issues that I was enlightened about over the course of that year, and primarily self-determination. So, long answer.
Yeah, no, and I really appreciated the way you kind of wove in what was going on with your family. I mean, there's some, major issues, your parents getting divorced and then your mom marrying that guy.
The bad man.
It was terrible.
Yeah.
And then you also kind of talked about your evolution in terms of your love life too. Can you talk a little bit about that? I mean, obviously this book impacted you quite a bit.
Oh yeah.
Talk about, how you kind of evolved throughout the year that you were riding the bus with them.
Well, I would say it was the start of an evolution that has persisted since the book came out, and on a daily basis,
Yeah.
till now. I think I didn't start at a place that a lot of people might start at, because when you're a sibling, particularly, I mean, there's an 11-month difference. So I never knew reality without Beth. I've always been able to understand the way her mind works to the extent that anybody could.
Yeah.
But I'm pretty good at it. I've always been kind of called upon by the world to, and her, to kind of be the translator between the two. Not that I have ever seen there being two worlds. I've seen there being one world. But I think a key distinction that is really important for people who do not have the sibling experience, and who perhaps have a parent experience, is a lot of people enter into the disability community transitioning in after they have existed in the world, the temporarily able-bodied world. And for parents, when they transition in, sometimes that is accompanied by a period of grieving, sometimes self-recrimination. If, let's say, when they were a kid, they, used the pejorative words to degrade people. And it can be a very shocking and troubling realization, and particularly as people become aware of the terrible history we've had and how we've treated people with disabilities. When you're a sibling, and particularly if you're close in age, there's no before. So there's no need to grieve. This is reality. And it's as close as you're going to get to the disability experience without being a person with a disability. And you also walk through life with the person. You're with them as little babies playing together. You're with them when they're understanding puberty and helping them with that. You're with them in the transition into living out of the house and all of that. You're watching how the world treats them. You're watching how they learn how to deal with that.
Yeah.
And with my sister, admirably, how she developed a very thick skin and wouldn't take crap from anyone. I mean, she's a tough cookie. She's a real character,
Yeah.
like Major League,
Yeah.
real character, and brought much pleasure and sense of justice to my life. But I think I fell down on the job because I think there were certain ways that, I think many families do this. You look at a person with an intellectual disability, and there's a lot of cultural beliefs and maybe realistic ones that they need to be protected. And it can be very difficult to step back and say, I can learn to love this person as they are and let them make their own choices, which would mean make their own mistakes and learn from those own mistakes, as I would with my other siblings, as I would with myself. So to accept her as the bus drivers accepted her and stop judging this lifestyle and just accept it. And that was a huge transition for me. All of these people, by their example, were helping me do. And Jesse, and even now, I mean, he'll say really, because they're very close, and they spend it all day, every day with each other at this point, more so even than when I wrote the book. And he has this thing he said to me. I put it in the book. I think about it a lot. He's from the South. We're not. And the way he puts it is, gotta understand that her mind is set like a clock, and no one is gonna reset that clock. And he's right. Or to put it another way, one of the bus drivers in the book, a dear, wonderful man, Jacob, he, very wise person. He said, when I'm not patient with Beth, I know it's not about Beth, because Beth is just Beth.
Yeah.
I know it's about me, and I have to look at what do I need to do to change myself. And when he first said that to me, I thought, no, she's the one who needs to change. And over time, I kind of grasped, yeah, that wall needs to change. Okay, is that going to happen? Well, maybe I can change how I deal with that wall. And once I did those things in my mind and learned to step back and just accept Beth in her totality and not reserve love because she wasn't being who I wanted her to be, the crap between us started to really go away, and the whole bad sister problem lifted from me. It was transformational.
I think this is a very important point. It's interesting that you bring it up, because that's right. Often when there are conflicts between people, we point the finger and say, okay, it's you, as opposed to, no, it's me. I need to change. And if I don't change, then, okay, the conflict is going to remain.
Yeah.
I want to, one of the things the book pointed out to me was this whole culture of the bus drivers.
Yeah.
And really how, you think of a bus driver, right? So what's the prejudice? Oh, it's someone, couldn't kind of make it in the world, and they just drive a bus. But you bring out the fact that these bus drivers are really, very, they're bright people, right? And this is what they're doing. Talk a little bit about some more of the bus drivers and, more of what you found with this whole culture of, these bus drivers.
It's actually a really wonderful world that this was my introduction to. And eventually I met, hundreds of bus drivers because this book led to that happening. And I'll tell you a few things people have said to me over the years that, after I wrote the book. One was a bus manager. And he said, I don't hire bus drivers, I adopt them. Because bus drivers are not truck drivers. They are not hauling cargo. This is people. And if they're not a people person, they need to get out of the job.
Yeah.
And it's true. And I think that one of the, I really do really rankle at the stereotypes of people with intellectual disabilities big time. So I don't want anybody to slide in. I put my sister or Jesse on a pedestal. I don't. But as all of us have some finer qualities, one of Beth's is she is attuned to people a lot of people's eyes gloss over. So like she knows her mail carriers really well and the security guards and bus drivers, and with the bus drivers really getting to know their lives, and then they would open up to me, and each one had such an interesting story and had so much to them.
Yeah.
And some of them, like one wrote poetry on the back of transfers as he was nursing a broken heart, and there was another one who was dealing with, problems with men, a woman who was dealing with problems with men who ended up kind of running like a support group for women on the bus, informally, and others who are on spiritual journeys, and others who are kind of take over the buses, like so it becomes their theater, their pew, their the place where they philosophize in their minds. I know bus drivers who've married passengers. I know bus drivers who've become just really major players in the labor movement because they don't only see like a cause for all the bus drivers to unionize, or in the bus drivers union that exists. They're like frontline counselors of people going through all kinds of things. Like one of the bus drivers in the book, Estella, she says, I know when someone gets like thrown out by their wife or gets out of jail, or they're going to bail someone out, or they're going to visit a person dying in the hospital, I'm the first person they see. And so they will unload to her, and she said, I've been many a shoulder. And a good bus driver takes that role very seriously and is highly instrumental in people's lives. I remember when I was writing the book, and a friend who I had worked with when I was temping as a secretary said, I mentioned this, and she said, oh yeah, like, she lived in Philadelphia, which is not where the book takes place. And she said, like on the 48, when I go home after like a late shift, she said, I talked to my counselor. And I said, what do you mean? And she said, my bus driver.
Yeah.
I did every night. I get to talk to him, and he kind of clarifies things for me. So they are emblematic of actually many people who are overlooked, who really do frontline counseling for an awful lot of people in society who are overlooked. And it's not just people with disabilities, it can be all kinds of people. And it's a special role.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it was just, to me, I mean, I learned so much from reading the book, and I didn't, my expectation was, okay, I'm not going to learn about bus drivers. And
right.
It was great. I want to get back to this issue of self-determination. I work with a lot of people with intellectual disability. They're in their 20s, 30s, still at home and all that.
Yeah.
I mean, how, it sounds like, your family has been able to let go. Beth does her life and all that. I mean, how you've talked a little bit about how you got to that point, but how do we help, especially the parents, to, let go and let people do their lives?
That's an excellent question, and kind of one for the ages. I think it's actually easier for siblings because, when you like share a bedroom with somebody, you see them more broadly, and you also can maybe see aspirations that the parents don't necessarily see. But let's leave all of that aside. There are elements of realism. Most children live beyond their parents' lives.
Yeah.
And if one is looking ahead, which, to my parents' credits, they did,
Yeah.
One must prepare for that. And you can prepare that if the individual has siblings or other relatives by determining that they're going to live with those people. But what if those people don't want that, or they marry someone who doesn't want that, or they end up having circumstances in their lives where that is more than they can handle, or they don't get along with the individual? It is unfair to force that upon other people. So for an individual to have more independence, whether that is to the extent Beth does or some in between situation, is mutually beneficial. But I think another really key thing is, if one looks back at one's own life, you don't really come into who you are when you're still living with your family of birth.
Right.
And you don't realize it. And you may be, that's the world you know. You may be comfortable. You may be comfortable with the conflicts because they're so familiar. Maybe there aren't conflicts. But until you're more making your own choices and having to make your own choices, you don't really know the measure of yourself. And it is only fair and right to give people as much choice as possible. But let me be a little clearer on this, because there may be people who say, well, but my daughter, she's nonverbal, she has serious mobility issues, this, that, and the other thing, she needs a lot of protection. Okay. People can still have choice, and people can have choice whether they're real independent like Beth, or they need a lot of support like a lot of other people do. And there's a way that families can foster that. And here is one real simple thing. Present two options for many things. Not, let's say, it's Saturday, what do you want to do? But it could be, it's Saturday, you want to go to the mall, or do you want to go visit Uncle Jack? And let the person choose. And if they say both, I want to do both, or, in a nonverbal way, indicate that, you can say, that's not one of the choices. And when you start moving into presenting options in a way that doesn't overwhelm people because you're just opening things up so much, it can be initially hard for people, and they may want more than you can handle. This happened with Beth, well, we can do this or we can do that. I want to do all. Well, I can't do all of that. It's not realistic for my car to be able to get us to all these places, or the bus to be able to get us to all these places in the time I have available. So I learned to say that's not one of the choices. And I also learned to say, I understand it can be hard to make this decision. We'll just sit here until you decide. And usually that's enough motivation for the person to just make a choice. And once they get a taste of making a choice, and you get a taste of backing away, not imposing upon them, they start seeing themselves differently, and you start seeing yourself differently as someone who is not as merged with them, and whose sense of how you show your love to them starts to detach from what you may come to realize is some degree of controlling them and letting who they are. It is a process. Self-determination for the family member is a process, and through the book, I'm really in a big way, and I still do, but I'm better at it, and I take that philosophical stance. Plus, I take that philosophical stance with every relationship I have, and people I don't know. If I read about someone in the paper, I view it differently than I did.
Yeah. Jesse and Beth had, in the book, you describe their love and all that. And they they really had specific times when they would see one another. I mean, Beth was really clear about that. Is that still the relationship, or are they more together? They see each other more?
You were a little bit during the
All
question.
right.
You asked the question again. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, no. So, in the book, Beth and Jesse, um, there were times when they would see each other and times when, okay, I'm doing my thing. Have they
Yeah.
have they changed that relationship at all, or are they more?
Okay.
Yeah,
Are they more? Well, interesting. Oh, you asked such good questions.
thanks.
You really do. Well, a lot has changed since the book, and I'll try to bring it up to date. Um, Beth has remained in the exact same apartment, which is where both of these photos were taken. Very decorated because she's lived there for, since 1993. So she's really floor to ceiling, every wall. Yeah, it's great. He was not having such luck with his living situations, and he didn't have much family support, as Beth did. And he was living in some living situations where bad elements became neighbors, and he needed to move. And there were a number of those, and he, for a little while, had trouble selecting friends wisely, and got into some messy situations. And this led to them kind of separating for a little while, and him ultimately no longer working with the same agency that Beth is still with, and living in really bad living situations that were called shared family, or family sharing, that weren't really that. They were almost glorified institutions. And I think technically they were called personal care facilities, where maybe 100 people lived there, and they provided, the people who ran it provided meals and medications, and but you were living with people, several to a room, and the vibe was bad. And during that time, which began maybe 7 years ago, Beth put aside her sadness over their rift and re-extended herself as a friend, with and this, he actually was living past where the buses went, so I would take her there. And I grew closer to him during that time, because he's really a dear person and a wonderful person, and he had a real bad shake in life. And she was his only friend at that point, and wasn't pushing the romance thing. And eventually we got him into a slightly better residential situation, which was still pretty bad. And right before COVID, his really wonderful case manager worked with me to get him into his own apartment, which is only 2 blocks from Beth. So it's this dream. And I was kind of drafted to play a formal role in his life, because he needed somebody to play that role, not working with an agency, not having involved family. So I became what's called his rep payee, and I'm in the process of going through some other steps to play even more of a formal role in his life. So I became the point person for him. So I spend as much time on his support now, in very practical ways, as I do on Beth's emotional support, and they're in my life all day. I turned off all my phones before we started the Zoom call. So because his situation has changed so much, and it has, and that whole long journey to where he is now revealed a lot of vulnerabilities in him, and because he's older, and because they renewed a mutual, how would I put it, interconnectedness, they started to spend, I mean, pretty much their days are, he'll go over and wake her up at 6 in the morning or so. They'll take the bus to Walmart, get him coffee, do a little shopping, get back to her place by 9, watch TV, get back on the bus. So it's sort of this all day long. She does his laundry. She helps set up his meds. I check them. And then like 9 at night, he goes home to his apartment. So they're very integrated in each other's lives. But there are times when I think, like anyone, one needs alone time. So he'll go and ride his bike, or, one of them will take a nap, or she'll ride the bus and he'll just hang out in the apartment. So now, do they always get along? No, but I would say 95% of the time. And he understands Beth, and he understands she can be very dominant, and she calls the shots. She's sort of the queen.
Yeah.
And he knows how to deal with that, and he knows how to keep her happy and listen to her when she's not, and how to deal with his own happiness, which is usually with her, but every so often, on his own. He has certain things he's very interested in that he pursues on his own, like hanging out with the police and firemen. He loves that. And so that's a big part of his kind of private life. But I would say, most of every day they're together all the time,
It's a really beautiful love story. I mean,
it is.
It's
true.
It really is. And, especially for our times, right? With all the America's underbelly has come up in terms of, the racism and all that. And you look at these two people and you just go, beautiful, just incredible.
Yeah. Yeah. I can't imagine my life with, I feel, we're not really a threesome, but almost, and I just can't imagine life without both of them. And I feel really, I don't know. I feel sorry for people who don't have that.
Yeah.
I really do. I mean, in so many ways, who don't not only have, this example of love, but who also, these are people who need social services, who are friends with bus drivers and firemen, and who live on food stamps and who live in public housing. And I am in that world, and very few people who I would consider people with, have that experience. And whatever their politics are, they're not informed by the reality that I experience every day.
Yeah. I'm really struck. This is the first time we've met, but I know you a little bit through the book and now through your talking, but it seems that, from what I've read in the book to where you are now, you have evolved tremendously.
Yeah, that's true.
Just, incredibly. And, it's because of the sister, right? That's a large part of it.
Well, I would say she was sort of my gateway drug, because it led to the book, and then the book led to me getting asked to do public speaking, which I then have done for, close to 20 years. And the public speaking has led me to meet, thousands of activists and advocates and family members and transit workers, and to be in most, not quite every, but most states in the country. And it's an amazing education, and every person is a universe, and every person, however they're designated by society, has incredible, not just value, but valuable things to impart if you find a way to communicate with them and to truly listen to what they are communicating to you. It's been really a gloriously lucky set of circumstances. It really has been.
And you've written some other books about people with disability,
Yes.
a few novels and such. Can you just say a few words about those?
Yeah, the main other one is called The Story of Beautiful Girl. And The Story of Beautiful Girl, which I covered to hold up. And actually, there's a different one for paperback and hardback. So that one, okay, so Beth grew up in the family, as you know, and my family was not going to do the institution thing. But as I was doing all these talks, I kept meeting people who had, in fact, lived in institutions or worked in them or had family members in them. And it's a wrenching, everybody had wrenching stories.
Yeah.
There were staff I met who were, truly loving, dedicated people who kept up with a lot of the individuals. But they all, of course, had stories to tell about people who were not the way they were. And I realized that the story of institutions for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities is underappreciated in our society. And for your average American, if you say, oh, we people who lived in institutions, they immediately think of people with psychiatric disabilities.
Right.
They don't think of people with, Down syndrome or autism or cerebral palsy, or Beth, where there was no known reason for her disability, for her intellectual disability. And as far as I know, there's no known reason for Jesse's either. So I wanted to write that story. And I was struggling to figure out how to do it. I knew I had to do it, but I would figure out how to do it. And then one day I came across, wow, I wonder if I can actually just find it on, these are my disability books here. Where do I have this book? I was leaving a, hang on, I'm going to find it. It's going to bother me if I can't find it. Oh, goodness. Here we are. Okay. I was leaving a talk in Illinois and about to get picked up to go to the airplane, and browsing the books came across this one, God Knows His Name, The True Story of John Doe, number 24 by Dave Bakke. And, and look at that cover, and it breaks your heart just looking at it and the title. And then I read the back. This real person, was found wandering in the streets in Illinois in 1945. And authorities found him, and they realized he was a young man who was deaf. They couldn't communicate with him, and they didn't know who he was. And they briefly held him for a while, and the way he behaved, which is somebody in his circumstance would be like pretty scared and not being able to communicate and nobody there knowing who you are. A judge just decided, because of a couple of incidents, that he was feeble-minded the term of the day, and threw him in the nearby institution for people with intellectual disabilities. And he was there for 50 years until he died, and no one ever knew who he was. And no one was ever able to understand the signs that he made. And when he died, the New York Times found out this John Doe had died and wrote an obituary about him. And the singer-songwriter Mary Chapin Carpenter read the obituary and was so moved, she wrote a song about it, which is wonderful. You should listen to it or look at the video where she performs it. And then this reporter named Dave Bakke, who wrote for a paper in Illinois, heard her song and was so moved. He said, well, this is Illinois. I'm in Illinois. I researched this man's life. And he went to the institution, which was still open, and interviewed everyone he could and put together this book of what was known about this man's life, and then speculating on how he ended up in this situation. And he speculated in 1945, let's say this man had come from the South, wouldn't have been hard to end up in Illinois for whatever reason.
Yeah.
And if he was deaf and in the South, or not deaf and in the South, he would have been in segregated schools, but deaf schools were segregated too. And there were some people in the deaf schools who were in the African American deaf schools who ended up learning a different sign language and could not have been able to communicate up north. And I'm reading this book on the plane and bawling my eyes out. And by then I was very close to Jesse, and, who's from the South and had his own, family dramas. And it just so affected me. And when I eventually, in a kind of sad mood, sat down to just try having a crack at this book idea, what I knew of Jesse and this man kind of blended together into, let's just like, boom, an opening chapter where there's an interracial marriage, or not marriage, romance, a couple who shows up in a stranger's door in a dark and stormy night with a newborn baby, and they had escaped from the nearby institution, and the man is deaf and the woman has an intellectual disability. But unlike my sister, is not talkative, she has selective mutism. She's chosen to stop speaking, and they end up getting caught by the authorities that night and end up getting all separated. The baby gets left with the stranger. The woman is taken back to the institution, and the man ends up in a series of really trying journeys, and everybody struggles for the next 40 years to reunite. I began the story in 1968, which was the height of our institutionalization for people with intellectual disabilities. And so the woman's storyline, Beautiful Girls, covers her emotional arc and the real arc of what happened to our institutions over the second half of the 20th century, and how it led into community-based services, and self-determination and self-advocacy and all that good stuff. Whereas my John Doe character, whose inner life to me was the most amazing part of writing that book, his storyline kind of follows disability storyline as he eventually ends up making his way out to Berkeley, where which is not named, where he gets involved in, he ends up at what later became known as the Ed Roberts Center, but I also don't call it that. And so there's a lot of disability history woven into that for people who do know that history, and they can go, ooh, 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 look at that and look at that. But for other people who don't, it definitely doesn't feel like medicine. It's just fiction, but you realize, these must be real references I'm making. And then lastly, I think it's important for me to say, when I was growing up and reading books about people with intellectual disabilities, which I would grab at every one I could, they always had tragic endings. And it would piss me off, because my sister was a pretty happy person, and she was determined to have, as full a life as anybody. And I view her as having wherever you want to say the ending has fallen in her life, they're all happy, except for the bad man with my mother. And they're all happy. So I did not go into, I think, a lot of sort of grand love stories in literature or individuals with disabilities. The writer goes into it thinking, well, this has to have a tragic ending. And that's not my bias. So let's just put it that way.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to reading that book. That's for sure. All right. Well, we've had a wonderful interview. And I thank you.
Yes, this has been fun. Look, everybody who's participating, I'm going to leave you with a couple thoughts. One is something head of the Arkansas Public Transit Association would say. She would get right in your face and she'd say, ride the damn bus. So, you want to really be in the real world, ride the damn bus. It really makes a difference. And if your community doesn't have transit system, your community is irresponsible, and you need to work on that, because you may say, oh, but we don't need buses around here because everyone drives. Yeah, right. There are no Beths and Jessies in your community? Wrong. And if these people don't have access to public transportation and the training to use it, then what you have is you sentence them to house arrest, and you've sentenced their sisters to spend their lives as a chauffeur. And I was not born to be Beth's chauffeur. So nobody should be consigned to that. That's what a society is for. It's services for people, and services for people who need those services. And Beth and Jesse are those people. So that's one thing, ride the damn bus. And the other thing is, when the story Beautiful Girl was almost out and I was visiting Beth, I pulled it out of my bag and I said, hey, here's my next book. And she looks at it and she kept misreading the title. You know, it's a story of a beautiful girl. No, the story of the beautiful girl. No, the story of beautiful girl. I said, that's right. And she said, is it about me? And I said, no. And she handed it back to me like, yeah, right. Like I should care. But a few days later, I signed, a copy, mailed it off to her. She calls me up and she said, I got your book. And I said, great. And she said, I took it to get it signed. I said, but Beth, I signed it. She said, no, I took it on the bus. So next time I'm back, she pulls out this book and shows she has 138 signatures all over the book, purple ink, because of course she brought her favorite pen. And so I said, wow, whoever said only an author can sign a book? You got all your friends to sign your book. And she said, I've done that with all your books, which I had no idea. So the other thing you can do is find your favorite book and bring it to all your favorite people and have them sign it. And then you can actually qualify as being cool without even ever meeting Cool Beth. So that's my final thought to everybody who's watching.
Thanks, Rachel.
My pleasure. Thank you, Michael. Really, really appreciate it. Ride the bus.